Hello, and welcome to Forestry Fridays. My name is Beth Hill. I'm the Outreach and Education Manager for the North Dakota Forest Service. And today we are going to be talking about right tree, right place. Spring is a great time to plant trees. As the snow slowly begins to melt, we will start to see the soil and grass peeking out, and many North Dakotans will start to get excited for the growing season. As we look through the garden catalogs, we can start to let our imagination run wild. So it's important to really think about what trees are going to grow best on your land. And many people will turn to our staff at the North Dakota Forest Service to ask our expert opinion. And in response to that, we more than often use the phrase, well, it depends. However much I wish it was a simple, easy answer, it's not. There are a lot of factors that go into these recommendations. Each person has a different vision for their landscape, preferences on tree types, and willingness to maintain them too. So we have to ask ourselves some key questions. What do we want that tree to do or accomplish? And where is it going to be planted? Trees certainly aren't cheap. If we're talking conservation tree seedlings, sure, the price tag is a little more palatable. But when you consider the time and effort to get those little trees in the ground, that adds a lot of value to our project. When we think of landscape trees, we are usually selecting a larger specimen, maybe from a garden center, and those can run a few $100s or more. When we consider the cost, whether indirect or direct, for things like maintenance, which include watering, mulching, tree fabric, weeding, all of that can add up to be a really big investment. If we're spending all of this time and money on a tree, wouldn't you want to do everything you can to ensure that that investment was made wisely? When we plant a tree, we don't just want it to live, we want it to thrive. So choosing the right tree for the right place is important for all types of tree planting. Trees that perform well are often overused on the landscape. Think elms, ash trees, spruce. You may recall hearing about Dutch elm disease way back in the day. When it was discovered in North Dakota, it absolutely devastated our elm tree populations. We do see elm trees today even be taken out by this disease. Oftentimes, where an elm was taken out, an ash tree may have been put back in. That's because ash trees do really well on a variety of sites and conditions in North Dakota. However, this overabundance of the species has raised concerns with the discovery and spread of emerald ash borer, or EAB. EAB is not in North Dakota yet, but we would likely see some severe, devastating impacts to our tree populations in the years following its discovery in our state. Our North Dakota tree inventory and planning tool show ash tree populations ranging from 16 to nearly 80% in our communities, with an average street tree population of 38% green ash. Diversity and conservation windbreaks reveal very similar numbers. So when discussing what tree to plant, diversity must be another thing we consider. I'll cover this more in a bit. Choosing the right tree for the right place is an important consideration for all types of tree planting. Ignoring this guideline may lead to more maintenance overall, a failure of plants to thrive, and oftentimes the death of the trees that we just installed. Careful planning and site evaluation are the first steps in applying this concept. Trees and shrubs vary considerably in their ability to tolerate different site conditions, so it's really important to select plants that match the existing growing conditions of our site, not just for their ornamental value. Even the best planting practices will not help a plant to thrive if it's poorly suited for a particular site. One of the first considerations we make when choosing what tree to plant is its function. What do we want this tree to do on our landscape? What purpose does it have? What do we want it or need it to do? Some homeowners or landowners select trees that can function as a windbreak, catching snow and reducing our heating and cooling costs around those homes. Maybe this means you need a few rows to perform this function. So you're looking for a mix of evergreen species in your windbreak on the north to block cold winter winds. Agricultural producers utilize these rows of trees adjacent to their cropland to reduce the impacts of North Dakota's harsh winds and helps keep that precious topsoil in place. These plantings can also add value to the land as crucial wildlife habitat. Maybe you want this tree to shade your yard or your home. Planting something like a large evergreen close to the house on the south side would block warming winter sunlight. So instead you look for large deciduous trees on the southeast, southwest, and west to provide cooling shade in summer and also doesn't obstruct the low winter sun. Some people want to use trees as a privacy screen on their land. Tall poplars around the perimeter of your yard are a great choice for a large-scale living privacy fence, or maybe you're looking for a more dense hedge. In that case, maybe some arborvitae are the way to go. The last function I have here is one of my favorites, food. Fruit trees and shrubs can be an excellent addition to your landscape, often providing beauty as well as yummy treats to enjoy throughout the growing season. Whatever tree you do decide to plant, always make sure that you match the species to the site. Our nurseries are pretty good at knowing and selling cultivars that are suited for our growing conditions. We use this based on the USDA's plant hardiness zone map. Around Bismarck, for example, we are classified as zone 4A. That means our average annual extreme minimum temperature is -25 to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Trees classified as zone 4A and lower can be expected to survive through these really extreme minimum temperatures. Granted, this says average, so we know that we can have warmer winters and colder winters. So if you plant something that is in a zone that's different, say like a 5, so a more temperate zone, that doesn't mean that the tree could never survive here, especially if extensive care and cover was given to that tree, but it's just likely that they wouldn't survive the low temperatures. I always err on the side of caution with this, so stick with cultivars that are bred for our harsh winters. You want to match the moisture requirements of your site to the tolerance of the species. So if a place you're planting trees tends to be more waterlogged, you want to make sure that you pick something that's more flood tolerant. That's saying don't plant a lilac or conifer in those areas. These species are known to be more intolerant of wet sites. Similarly, we don't want to plant those willows on a site that's likely to be continually dry. This ties in well with my last bullet on this slide, which is the soil. I don't just say this because I was trained as a soil scientist, but the soil is one of the most important factors in tree planting. So much so that we'll be having another Forestry Fridays video this season just about why soils are important for trees. The properties of the ground beneath our feet really determine which species can grow. Soil texture ties in directly with moisture availability. Salts, sodium, and carbonates limit which species can grow on those sites. And in conservation tree planting, there exists a handy tool called Web Soil Survey that will give you information on the soils on your land based on historic soil surveys. We talked about this a little bit last season on Forestry Fridays. This also gives you recommendations on suitable trees for your particular sites. In an urban tree setting, however, Web Soil Survey simply may not be available, or so much has changed to that site that the data isn't applicable anymore. We see things like construction, moving soil, grading, and excavating. All of those things can alter the soil profile and change soil characteristics. Because of this, we can see compaction, over and under fertilization, and more temperature extremes in these urban sites. So these sometimes tougher sites require tougher cultivars that are bred to withstand these site challenges. This requires more site-specific investigation too, utilizing things like soil tests and assessing the greater landscape around where you want to plant that tree. The size and location of the tree, including roots and branches, should really affect our decision on which species to plant as well. First, we want to think about where is this tree going to be growing? Think of both above and below the ground. Are there utility lines overhead? When trees grow and extend into power lines, this can cause power outages and safety hazards for both you and your neighbors. And planting large trees under overhead utility lines often results in disfigured trees over time. It is never okay to plant trees and shrubs in a utility easement, regardless of how big they will get. So a utility easement is the area where a utility company has the right to access and control the portion of another person's land that is located near utility facilities and structures. This can be utility poles, transformers, and overhead and underground electrical lines as well. Roots can damage the protective coating found on underground lines, which can then interrupt your and your neighbor's utility services. This can lead to safety hazards, and you can also be required to shell out cash for repair costs and fines. So whenever planting a tree, we want to make sure we call 811 and have your underground utilities marked to avoid all of this on the front end. So this applies to structures as well as utilities. Before you buy a new tree, you want to find out about that tree's growth potential, and then it can help you plan accordingly when you're ready to plant so that there's ample space between the plant and that structure. Spacing and mature height are especially important when we consider conservation tree plantings for windbreaks. Effectiveness of a windbreak is largely determined by its density. Rows of trees and shrubs planted relatively close together provide a solid barrier to the wind, and selection of species and their mature overall height will be important to the function of the overall windbreak. Windbreaks work best when they're a continuous row with no gaps, and so appropriate spacing both between the trees and between the rows upon planting is a must. Boulevard trees, or the trees that grow in the green space between sidewalks and the street, those need special considerations as well. You never want to plant an evergreen tree like a spruce on a boulevard. These trees can grow very large and become a hazard for drivers, blocking their view of the road. And a lot of times boulevards endure some really harsh conditions, so you want to select trees that can best survive there. They tend to be drier, and the salt and other chemicals that are used to keep roads clear in the winter, those things can all have a negative impact. There are several requirements regarding placement of trees in relation to other trees, driveways, street corners, fire hydrants, and things like light poles. So you want to make sure you know the rules and recommendations for your specific community. Some communities even have a list of approved species for planting in boulevards. So you want to make sure you contact your local city forestry department to find out more. And some communities may even have some cost share opportunities available to you. And then there are other factors to help you pick the right tree for your right site. These ones are definitely where you can have a little bit more fun. So a lot of people love the cherry and apple blossoms that bloom in May. I know I do. And so there are a number of other trees that produce flowers for you to enjoy as well. We have Japanese tree lilac. Those typically bloom later than other flowering trees, a little more in June. So you get that beauty and those wonderful smells after everything else has fallen off. Ohio buckeye trees actually produce a really neat flower shown here. Foliage color is a big one for many people. I can't say I've met anyone who doesn't love the beautiful fall colors we see on our trees. Some people are partial to those really brilliant reds and oranges that maples can bring. Ohio buckeye, again, is a really great alternative for some similar fall colors. Same with mountain ash, and we have sumac as well, even serviceberry. Maybe you prefer yellows, so lindens, honey locust, or hackberry may be more of your style. Some people select their species incorporating bark color. Aspens and birch have really characteristic white bark that's really recognizable and attractive. I mentioned fruit earlier as a function component, but really can be considered as a mess component as well. Some people may like the beautiful flowers in the spring on crabapple trees, but might not want the fruit itself, so they can select a cultivar that doesn't produce any fruit, like the spring snow crab. Same with other trees like honey locust, elm, cottonwood, Ohio buckeye, Kentucky coffee tree, or oak. All of those produce a type of seed that later falls to the ground and will need to be picked up. Some people don't want to mess with that mess. Other people don't mind it. So make sure you pick the right tree with the right mess level that you can tolerate. Lastly, we have winter interest. We have trees that can provide additional interest and beauty year-round. Our evergreens like spruce, pine, juniper, cedar, those type of trees don't shed their leaves, so we can see some beautiful greens against the stark white of the snow in the winter. Sometimes we're even lucky enough to have some hoarfrost to make it even better. Some trees like oak hold on to their dead leaves throughout the winter, and trees like mountain ash have bright red to orange berries that stick around through the winter as well, adding a little pop of color. So we want a tree that will thrive in our location, fulfill a function or purpose, and we also don't want to overuse too many species. So we're pushing for diversity. In our lesson on Dutch elm disease and now emerald ash borer coming, we don't want to plant more of the same thing. This helps us to build a healthy, beautiful forest across North Dakota, ones that are more resilient against pests and diseases. And good news, researchers have been developing cultivars that are better suited for our unique conditions here in the Dakotas. One program that does this is the NDSU Woody Plant Improvement Program. Dr. Todd West and his colleagues do an excellent job of growing and evaluating new cultivars that are bred to do well on our sites in our climate. Towner State Nursery grows many of the conifer species that are used in North Dakota windbreak plantings, and they source their seed from trees locally here too. And Lincoln Oak Nursery does the same for many hardwood species available at your local soil conservation districts. NDSU has the North Dakota Tree Selector tool online. You can search it at the web address or use the QR code here. What's cool about this tool is that on the left-hand side, you can filter for traits that you want to see in your tree. Things like growth rate, fall color, tolerances to drought and shade, flooding, things like that. It will show you species that would be well suited for your specific needs to help you choose the right tree for the right place. Or, as always, feel free to contact your local extension agent, soil conservation district, and our staff at the North Dakota Forest Service. We are always happy to help get trees put on the landscape. A healthy tree planting begins with careful planning. With a little research and a simple layout, you can produce a landscape that will cool your home in the summer and tame the winter winds. Your well-planned yard will contain trees that grow well in the soils that you have. Your trees will be properly placed to avoid collisions with power lines and buildings, and the aesthetics will increase your property value and increase your happiness as well. So I wish you a happy tree planting this year. For more information on trees and forest management, visit our website, or you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at North Dakota Forest Service. Thank you again for joining us this Forestry Friday.